It's a strange thing to walk into a place knowing the dark history that haunts it, and yet still not truly believe in what people say. But in New Orleans, the Holloway Hotel had this way of making you question what you thought you knew. Sarah and I had arrived on spring break, our faces lit up by the city's vibrant lights and the intoxicating mix of history, mystery, and magic. We'd heard the rumors, of course, disappearances, ghostly whispers, a piano that played on its own at night. But we laughed it off. Ghosts weren't real, right? People just love to make up stories. The hotel itself was something out of another time, with its heavy velvet curtains, antique chandeliers, and gilded wallpaper that looked as though it might peel if you touched it. The kind of place you'd imagine in the haunted stories. Still, it felt luxurious, until you let your mind wander too far, and the unease crept in. We didn't care much about the stories. We were there to explore, not to get caught up in anything supernatural. But when the evening came, and the day's heat started to settle into the cool night air, I felt something I hadn't before. There was something off about the hotel, something old, something wrong. But Sarah was excited, and I didn't want to ruin the mood. We decided to take a walk down the halls, admiring the intricate details of the decor. The hotel was silent, almost too quiet, as if it were holding its breath. But then a soft sound broke through, the sound of music, a piano. I turned to Sarah, my curiosity piqued. "Do you hear that?" She nodded, her eyebrows furrowing. "It sounds like it's coming from the ballroom." I didn't know what possessed us, but we decided to follow the sound. The ballroom had been closed off for as long as anyone could remember, but the doors were slightly ajar, as if inviting us in. The music was faint at first, just a few notes drifting through the air, but as we walked closer, the melody grew louder, filling the corridor. My heart pounded in my chest as we approached the grand ballroom. It sounded so real, so tangible. When we stepped into the room, the music stopped. The silence was so profound, it was almost oppressive. My breath caught in my throat. The room was massive, decorated in dark wood and faded gold accents, an extravagant relic of the past. No one was there. No musicians, no guests. Just the emptiness of the space stretching out before us. "Maybe someone was just playing before they left," Sarah said, trying to sound rational. But I could see the doubt in her eyes. I shook my head. "No, this place hasn't been used in years." Then, without warning, a cold breeze swept through the room. Our flashlights flickered and went out. We both jumped, reaching for the buttons to turn them back on. But it was as if the darkness itself had swallowed the light. My pulse quickened, my skin prickling with the sudden chill that had settled over us. "Jamie, I don't like this," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. Before I could answer, I heard it, a soft shuffle of fabric, the faintest rustling like someone moving. My eyes darted to the balcony that overlooked the ballroom, and there, in the shadows, I saw her. A figure in a tattered gown, her hair wild and unkempt, stood at the railing, staring down at us with eyes that seemed too dark, too hollow to be human. I froze, unable to move, my mouth dry. It was as if the air had thickened and time had slowed. The figure didn't blink, didn't move, just stood there staring unblinking. Who are you?" I tried to call out, but the words stuck in my throat, barely audible. Then, a soft, cold voice echoed through the room, almost a whisper. "Stay forever." My heart lurched in my chest. The room seemed to darken, as if shadows were creeping in from every corner. Figures began to emerge, barely visible at first. Human shapes, but something wasn't right. They drifted, silent and motionless, closing in on us from all sides. Panic surged through me, and I grabbed Sarah's arm, pulling her toward the door. "We need to leave. Now." We turned, but as we reached the door, it slammed shut with a force that shook the walls. I threw myself against it, desperately trying to push it open, but it wouldn't budge. My breath came in frantic gasps, the air growing thick, as if something heavy pressed against my chest. "Jamie, what's happening?" Sarah's voice cracked with fear. The whispers grew louder, swirling around us, mocking us with their constant refrain. Stay forever." I could feel the weight of the voices pressing in on my mind. I tried to turn back, to look at the balcony, but the figure was gone. The room was now filled with darkness. No longer the grand ballroom I had seen before, but something ancient, something forgotten. Then I saw it, a figure. No, figures stepped out from the shadows. Pale, lifeless faces, hollow eyes, and tattered clothing. They walked slowly, aimlessly, like lost souls doomed to wander for eternity. They weren't quite human. They couldn't be. I felt Sarah's hand tremble in mine, and I tried to pull her back, but we were surrounded. The figures moved closer, their cold hands brushing against our skin as they passed. I could feel the chill of their touch, the despair in the air, and the heavy weight of their presence. "We can't leave," a voice hissed, and I realized with a sickening shock that it wasn't just the whispers anymore. It was one of them, speaking to us, speaking through us. We tried to scream, to fight back, but it was futile. The darkness consumed us. The last thing I saw before the world went black was the cold, lifeless stare of the figure in the tattered gown. Her eyes burned into me, and I understood then. We were never leaving. We were part of the hotel now. The next morning, the Holloway Hotel stood silent, as if nothing had happened. The halls were empty, the rooms pristine, and yet, the piano played, softly, mournfully, as it always had. No one had seen Jamie or Sarah. No one even knew they had been there. But the whispers in the halls continued, and the music never stopped. And those who checked in next, they would hear it too, if they dared to wander into the ballroom. The sound of an old piano, drifting through the air, playing its song for eternity. The story of the missing couple, their spirits trapped forever in the hotel's dark history, was woven into the fabric of the place. Another chapter in its endless, eerie lore. Moving to Asheville was supposed to be a fresh start. At 20, I was eager to carve out a life of my own, even if that meant working the graveyard shift at the Blackwood Hotel. It wasn't glamorous, but the idea of having quiet nights with only the occasional guest to check in seemed manageable. Or so I thought. The Blackwood Hotel was the kind of place you'd expect to see in a postcard, quaint, weathered, with a charm that bordered on eerie. The ivy-covered brick walls and creaky wooden floors told stories of its century-old history. And while most found it charming, I couldn't shake the feeling that something about it wasn't quite right. My first few weeks passed uneventfully, though I'd catch myself jumping at small noises. The clinking of pipes, the whisper of a draft, or the groan of the ancient elevator. It wasn't until my 6th night that things started to shift. That night, exhaustion hit me hard. Between balancing a day job and the night shift, I was running on fumes. My head buzzed, my limbs felt leaden, and the hotel's dim lighting blurred the edges of my vision. Around midnight, as I sat slumped at the front desk, I heard footsteps echoing down the corridor behind me. The sound was distinct, deliberate, heels clicking against the hardwood floor. I turned, expecting to see a guest who needed something, but the hallway was empty. I called out, "Hello." My voice sounded small in the cavernous silence. No answer came, shaking it off as fatigue playing tricks on me. I returned to my seat, though the skin on the back of my neck prickled with unease. A couple of hours later, a guest called down to say they'd forgotten their keys in the lobby. Room 305. I grabbed the keys and headed up. The sound of my own footsteps a dull echo in the long, empty corridor. When I reached the 3rd floor, I spotted someone standing in front of room 305, a hunched, elderly man with his back to me. He was muttering to himself, his voice low and guttural, like someone speaking through gritted teeth. "Sir, do you need help?" I called out, my voice more confident than I felt. The man turned slowly, his movements unnatural, like a puppet being manipulated. His face was lined with age, but his eyes, bloodshot and glinting with malice, bored into mine. Then, without a word, he stepped through the closed door of room 305 and vanished. My heart raced as I stumbled backward. I clutched the keys like a talisman and bolted back to the lobby, my mind reeling. Had I imagined it? Was it the exhaustion? I wanted to believe it was, but deep down, I knew what I'd seen. The next few hours passed in a haze of dread. I stayed glued to my chair, jumping at every creak and groan the hotel produced. Around 4 a.m., as I patrolled the lobby to pass the time, I heard it, a low, guttural groan coming from the direction of room 305. The sound was unnatural, a mix of anguish and fury that sent chills racing down my spine. Against my better judgment, I made my way back up, each step heavier than the last. When I reached the door, I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Summoning what little courage I had left, I pushed it open. The room was empty, spotless even, but the air was thick with an oppressive weight, like the walls themselves were watching me. I didn't linger. I slammed the door shut and sprinted back to the lobby, my chest heaving. As I passed the front desk, I froze. Sitting in my chair was the old man, his eerie smile stretching too wide for his face. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at me with those bloodshot eyes. My legs felt like jelly, but instinct kicked in, and I ran out of the hotel into the pre-dawn shift. When I finally gathered the courage to look back, he was there, standing in the window, his silhouette illuminated by the dim light of the lobby. He didn't wave or beckon, he just watched. The following day, I told myself I had to be imagining things. But when I mentioned the strange occurrences to one of the longtime employees, she gave me a knowing look. "Didn't anyone tell you about the Blackwoods history?" she asked. When I shook my head, she leaned in, her voice low. "Years ago, guests started disappearing. The police investigated, but never found any evidence. Some say the innkeeper, old Mr. Greaves, was involved, but he died before they could question him. People still claim to see him wandering the halls." My blood ran cold. The figure I'd seen, the groan from room 305, it all clicked. I wasn't just imagining things. I was seeing the ghost of the innkeeper himself. That night was my last shift. I didn't give notice or collect my paycheck. I couldn't bear to set foot in the Blackwood Hotel again. Even now, years later, I sometimes wake in the dead of night, heart pounding, convinced I see his face at the foot of my bed, smiling that same eerie smile. Some places are not meant for the living. The Blackwood Hotel is one of them, and I'll never forget the lesson it taught me. Exhaustion can blur the line between reality and nightmare, but some horrors are all too real.